Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for another NIDA in Conversation. I'm Tasnim Hossain. Before we begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that today I'm joining you from the unceded land of the Ngunnawal people, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and extend my greetings to all First Nations people who are joining us today. Across the country, we're all on Aboriginal land, and it always was and always will be. I'm joined today by Anne-Louise Sarks, who is an internationally acclaimed director, writer, and dramaturg. She's directed over 30 productions, with her work seen in Melbourne, Sydney, London, Helsinki, Mexico City, New York, Warsaw, Dublin, Auckland, Mumbai, Perth, and Basel. So all over. Her recent work includes Avalanche at the Barbican in London, which also came to STC a few years ago, and Our Town and Medea at Theater Basel. She has been artistic director of the Lyric Ensemble at the Lyric Hammersmith in London, and of Melbourne independent theatre company, the Hayloft Project. She directed a new feminist adaptation of Ibsen's An Enemy of the People for Belvoir, and her production of Sarah Kane's Blasted at the Multi was nominated for 4 Green Room Awards, including Best Director. She's been both resident director and an associate artist at Belvoir, director in residence at Malthouse Theatre. I was about to call it Multi again. I was like, no, Malthouse, professional. And in 2010, she was emerging resident director at MTC, which is where she will soon be returning. Most recently, she directed Stop Girl at Belvoir in Sydney, so earlier this year. For MTC, which is where she's going very soon, her work has included Minnie and Liras and The Seed. So she will also, as you may know, be taking up the role of MTC Artistic Director in October this year, and starting on the ground at the start of next year. Congratulations, Anne-Louise. That's very exciting, but we will come back to that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was just saying to you earlier that this is kind of the first time I've talked to someone, I guess, who, like, the core of their work is as a director, but you've also acted and co-written and dramaturged. What is it that drew you to directing?
Good question. Okay, hello. First, let me say I'm speaking to you from Gadigal land today. Okay, what drew me to directing? I think, when I first started, I started at university at Sydney Uni, and I think I guess I saw other people doing it, and I wanted to kind of make shows happen. And at that point, I was really interested in, all the different aspects, and I was acting, and I wanted to sort of be in the shows and make the shows and get some craft. And then over time, I think it turned out that I was actually more interested in being able to sort of drive what stories were being told and have a bit more agency. I think I found that really difficult about acting, not being in charge of what those stories were politically, especially, and also waiting for things to happen. And then there's another layer to that answer, which is that I was terrified of acting, even though I sort of loved it. And I really was happiest in rehearsal. And when I'm directing, I feel maybe more at the center of myself or something, and able to facilitate a group of people. And I feel sort of more comfortable working from that place. So it's sort of all of those reasons combined, I think, to put me here.
There is something really wonderful about directing, and I was talking to some of the TTSM students at NIDA yesterday. The thing that I really like about it is the fact that you get to work with people, and it's very much a job where it's managing kind of those relationships. And you said that you started at Sydney Uni.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your training and kind of how you learnt those skills that you now use?
So I started at Sydney Uni, and at Sydney Uni, some people listening will know there's a group called SUDS, the Sydney University Drama Society, and UNSW has NUTS, and all sorts of universities really all over the world have groups where people put on shows. And That's the more I think about it now, it was crucial for me because there's a space at Sydney Uni called the Cellar Theatre, and that space basically you can kind of pitch a show to have that space for a few weeks and put on a show, and that's an incredible gift that I think really kind of set me up as a theatre maker, because there's such freedom in being able to kind of take over a theatre for a period of time, and also kind of all hands on deck, pull the show together yourself. You know, it wasn't then very formal. You know, some people were interested in design, but you were sort of doing the lights yourself, and you know, all those things. And I think I'm really grateful for that time and space to sort of test out a lot of stuff. From there, I went to VCA, so I went to the Victorian College of the Arts as an actor, and I did 3 years of acting training, and that's all the training I have. I didn't train as a director, which is a little bit unusual. I think a lot of other directors working have come through some sort of directing training, but I find that I use my acting training a lot, basically, to support my process with actors and with creatives, and I think about the work a lot from the inside, instinctively, for that reason, and have had to really learn to sit outside and think about the whole. So that's sort of where I got my craft, and then the rest is on the job, is the truth.
Yeah, great. I mean, well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your work, because you've worked on both new work, established work, classics that have kind of been that you've adapted or directed through particular lenses. Do you have a preference, and do you approach them differently?
Yeah, they are really different jobs, I think. This is a slight sort of aside to what you asked me, but the first play I directed that was sort of couldn't be adjusted, wasn't a sort of new piece of writing, was Sarah Kane's Blasted. Mm-hmm. And I remember doing that and going, oh my God, this is just a completely different job to directing a piece of new writing or a classic play. Like it's about sort of interrogation and digging into the work and sort of deciphering, you know, the meaning of the work and having to make something work as it is on the page. And it's not that it's easier, because it's not exactly, but it's so different to making a new play live, you know, really pulling a new work together. That work is so dependent on the relationship between you and the writer, and really you're both testing out that work, you know, with your audience for the first time, and I love the rigor of that, but it's terrifying to bring a new work to the stage in that way. There's so much that goes on sort of behind the scenes because you just don't know. You just don't know what it is you're making. You have theories about it until it lands in front of an audience. So I honestly really like them all for very different reasons. I don't know how to pick. I'd be so sad to sort of not be able to keep those different collaborations alive. True.
Very much so. Yes. When you're approaching, I guess, like a classic text, how do you find ways to, I guess, I hate the thought of using the word relevant, but it seems fitting here. But how do you make it speak to an audience of today, or, you know, whichever city you're working in?
It's such a good question, isn't it? Because for me, that's the deal breaker. If it doesn't actually have something to say to you now, if you as the artist don't feel you can find a reason right now to do that play, then I really don't think you should be doing it. Because you're asking people to gather. You're actually saying, come and be part of this experience, and you have to be really clear sort of what that reason is. And I think too often that reason is this famous person wanted to do this play. Or I want to go at that classic or something, you know, I want to do one of those plays that sort of proves that I'm this type of director who can do that. And actually, I think for me personally, I need a larger reason. Often that is political, you know, that's connected to this moment in time and has something to say, to teach me about the world that we're living in right now. So, yeah, it's crucial. I think if you you read a work, you can. I often find there's a sort of it's an instinct in me that makes me feel like something's very alive right now. And I've been surprised. I remember when I directed a show for Bell Shakespeare a while ago, 2017, I think it was. And honestly, when I first was invited to do that show, I was like, I don't think I need to do Shakespeare. The world is full of Shakespeares. I'm okay, thank you very much. And the offer was for Merchant of Venice, and I also was quite suspicious of that play, but I went away and I read it, and it was so ugly. It's such an ugly work, and I immediately felt like, oh, I think there's something in that ugliness that I can connect to about the world right now, and I went back to Belle and I said, if you are happy for me to pursue that, the sort of darkness of this piece of work, then I'm interested. And that taught me a really valuable lesson, actually, because from the outset I was going to let it go.
Yeah, I think being able to find some of those I guess possibilities in a text is often the thing that I find so exciting about directing, the fact that you can take the words on a page and then imagine this whole world and the particular lens through which to see it. You spoke about responding, I guess, to politics and things that were happening in the world in real time. Are there particular moments where you're I guess things might have shifted for you, or like it feels like you might be in conversation with a particular moment? Like, I guess, for example, I'm thinking of maybe something like Me Too, where it's felt like these conversations that a lot of people had been having behind closed doors were happening in the media, in the public.
It's funny because I think a lot of my work was already trying to deal with those things, but in some ways there wasn't always the I want to say receptivity. Is that the right word? People wanted. When I first was making work at Belvoir, people had really different opinions about some of those productions, but I took that version of A Doll's House and I called it Nora, and I made it about a contemporary woman who was really undermined by her husband and really unhappy in herself and in that sort of marriage and in that family, and who decided to leave. And people found that very difficult to take. And, perhaps I shouldn't have screwed with the Ibsen, and maybe it wasn't as successful in some people's minds as it should have been. But I think also people were a bit confronted by the politics of that work on that stage at that time. I remember one of the reviews saying, yes, he's like relentlessly condescending, but that's not a good enough reason for her to leave or something. I'm thinking, I don't know about you, but I think that will make me want to go. Anyway, that's a by the by.
I find that, it's interesting. I think also critics and the role of theatre criticism can have a real impact as well. Often you might have people who are responding to a particular work where maybe because of their approach to it, they can't read the subtext, or it just doesn't land in the same way.
Well, it just didn't feel relevant, clearly, to that person. And I remember being really confused that people didn't understand the justification, but also getting these extraordinary letters, mostly from women, saying, thank you so much for putting this story on stage here. And that's an extraordinary thing to have as an artist, to have that sort of direct contact. But yes, things have changed a lot since then, I think, and the stories that are on our stages now are much more driven by these questions, I think, and that's really exciting. We this is another funny little aside. If there's, but when I did Enemy of the People at Belvoir, another Ibsen, there's this scene where this sort of Trump-like character is undermining this, I guess, Clinton-like figure, and we just had that sort of horrible election, and all these men are tearing down this woman who's trying to convince this crowd to sort of follow her. And the other thing that had just happened was the judge in the States, the Supreme Court, had just, what was that extraordinary hearing before he was appointed, my goodness, listen, I don't want to lean on this, but I had a child and a lot of things have left my brain to make space for keeping a child alive.
Yeah, but we just outsource it to Google. It's fine.
Oh my God. Anyway, that guy who was accused of doing all these things to that young woman when they were at university got on the Supreme Court, and we just sort of
Brett Kavanaugh, is that the
thank
case?
you. Yes. Yeah. And anyway, something happened in the audience, and there was just this rage from women. And the piece in the fourth act asks for audience interaction, and women were screaming at the men on stage, and we sort of unleashed something because of what was going on in the world, and we hadn't planned that exactly. It was an extraordinary moment, like one of my favorites in the theatre, because it's like that's relevance, like that's actually, to go to your question, that's something we're aiming for, that sort of need to speak and voice your experience. But it's rare that you get that in the theatre, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that links really nicely to a question that has just come through from the audience, and also connects to something that I want to ask you about. Yeah. Because you've worked in a number of different cities in a number of different countries, I want to ask you about the differences between them. Are there different aesthetics? Are there different modes of working? And the question that's come in is, do you think Australia is quite sexist compared to other countries you've worked in, or are they all? So I guess this question is broadly about working in different contexts and, the different politics, aesthetics, ways of working.
Okay. They are all really different. They're all really different ways of working. And sometimes that's really explicit, and sometimes it's not. I think working in England is more different than you would think, given that we have so much shared sort of culture. I think a lot of people there found me very sort of direct and loud and unusual, and I like to lean into that. It felt like it gave me a freedom that I could sort of hold on to. Working in Europe is also very culturally different, but completely different model, because they're working with ensembles a lot of the time. So you're actually working with a group of actors who have an ongoing relationship with each other and a company, and you're the outsider. Whereas, in Australia, you sort of come in and then you gather the people together as a director. And it changed the power dynamic in that room in a really interesting way. Sexism is everywhere. That's the sad truth. It's in all our institutions. It's global. It's often really unconscious, I think, which is the hardest thing to deal with, because it makes you question yourself, I think, a lot of the time. I sometimes think as a director, who's a woman, that you're doing this sort of double think, where you're asking yourself, is this because I'm a woman? Is this, am I being reactive to this because I think something sort of is going on, or is it really going, like, it's I feel sometimes like I've wasted energy on that the men I work with and know haven't had to waste energy on, and I'm envious of that.
Very much so. I feel like, the sometimes people talk about imposter syndrome as being like a individualized thing, but I'm like, no, I think it's a structural societal thing, or like, that double think that you have to do that often happens. It's not just a personal thing, it also is from context and circumstances.
I think about it sometimes like intruder syndrome, actually. Like, there's a whole lot of people there telling you that you actually weren't meant to get in here, but you have somehow, and it's like a little bit of a novelty, and you might not be here very long.
Yeah, absolutely. All the time.
Yeah.
So another question came through, and they said that it's really great to hear about your experiences and it's really motivating. They want to ask about what kind of theatre you do, and do you follow any established methodologies?
Yeah, Established methodologies. I definitely couldn't say to you like I have this method and it relies on this. So no. I was trained at the BCA in a woman called Lindy Davies. Her method was the sort of main type of training that I have, and that's about working from impulse and following your instincts, and I mean it's far more complex than I can go into now, but a sort of really sensitive, kind of centered awareness of the space, the text, the artist that you're working with, and kind of responding to that in the moment. And I do use that, I think that is the main kind of guiding principle that I use. What was the rest of that question?
So it was about methodologies and what kind of theatre.
Oh, what kind of theatre? Yeah, look, I don't know how to answer that exactly. It's funny, isn't it? Other people, I'm sure, would be able to tell you what I do. What I try to do is I take a sort of classic story, and I look for its relevance to the moment, and I try to sort of recenter it mostly around the women or around voices that aren't being brought to the fore in that story. And I have done a lot of work like that, like a Medea that I did that was told from the kids' perspective, or the sort of Ibsens where I put women at the centre. And otherwise I'm doing kind of new writing that, again, has a sort of feminist heart, I think. That's my kind of main drive. Is that enough of an answer to that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's really hard. It's really hard to talk about your own work in that way because you're in it. It's hard to get the. Yeah. I'm sure someone writing an essay will be able to tell you. I want to ask you a question about that, about, writing about female subjects, and in this particular circumstance, living subjects. So the last play that you just did in Sydney, Stop Girl, was based on, was semi-autobiographical, written by journalist Sally Sara, about her experiences working as a correspondent in Afghanistan. And obviously, as the last few months have gone by, it's something that we are thinking about again as a nation, as a global community, where it has felt very kind of out of sight, out of mind. I guess, what is your responsibility to people, or what do you feel when you approach a work that is both based on someone's lived experience, that is also written by the person who it's about, and how, I guess, you navigate that really complex territory of these subjects who are still living in a political situation that is unfolding with very real consequences?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I've had this experience a couple of times of telling stories that were written by the people whose lives they were about. And it's really tricky because obviously that person is kind of present in the process and has their own ideas about sort of the story that they're telling. But there is a point when the story has to be sort of have a life of its own, separate to them. It's not biography on stage. It's meeting a whole lot of other artists and people, and has to be sort of interpreted. Sally Sara is just such an extraordinary woman, and she knew that, I think. Sally is in the business of telling stories, just from such a different angle, such a different perspective. So I really loved working with her, and her love of the theatre, I think, made that a really joyful sort of positive process as well. She really respected the form and was sort of excited by it, and I felt like we both knew the strengths that we were bringing to that collaboration. I've actually been in touch with Sally a bit since the US left Afghanistan, as that was unfolding, because I think I felt it very strongly, and to have brought that story to stage in Sydney, and it was set 10 years ago. It was about when Sally was there in Afghanistan, and it's so current, And I don't know. I don't really know what else to say about the responsibility I felt as a theatre maker, other than that I felt that so strongly. We had brought these people to stage. We had asked people to invest in them. And now what do we do with that investment? Where do we take that next? It felt to me like we had opened a window onto something, and I just, certainly in myself, I really wanted to kind of rush through that window, keep that connection alive, learn more, do more, donate more. And yet it also feels really such a large mess. It's such a horrible situation. But I guess I'm so grateful to Sally for sharing those stories with us, her own and the people that she worked with.
Yeah, there's something, I think, I guess the thing that I really love about the theatre is that the way that we kind of connect, in the nightly news, when you kind of hear these stories, you can always change the channel.
Right.
You can turn it off. You can go hit up your list of things that you have in your streaming library. But then in theatre, exactly as you said, when, you talked earlier about having work that's relevant, you're asking someone to come and spend their time in the theatre. So that's what they do. They spend an hour and a half in this world that we kind of have the great privilege of creating, which is something that's, I think, really lovely.
Yeah. And I do believe there's possibility for change inside that. And it's not like revolution exactly, but it is kind of, it can be personal change, I think. There's a moment in that play where we put a Taliban man on stage, and it was in the script, and I really wrestled with it. I didn't understand how to do it. It felt very odd to me to be trying to recreate that. And I think about that moment now. I think about what it represented for Sally. She was like, he's terrifying, she kept telling me, and that's what I needed to realise. And I didn't know how to do it, and we were still changing it in the theatre. And I think about that moment now, what it is to have created that moment, for people to have seen it. I hope they felt some of what she knew it was, because that's the reality over there in a massive way. I hope we made that live in some small sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the way that audience, I saw it one night and everyone seemed so connected, and it was something that, it was heartening to see that audiences wanted to hear that story and experience that.
Thank goodness. I think people are hungry for those stories. Yeah, I think,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm just a big nerd who loves journalists, and in another world, maybe where journalism continued to exist in the way it has in the past, I was like, that's what I would have loved to have done.
Oh, yeah.
Respondent. But I love that we get to work with journalists as
yeah.
I wanted to ask you about, I guess, your process as a working director. How is it that you secure work? I mean, obviously you're at a point in your career where people approach you, but when you were starting out, was it about pitching particular projects to companies, or was it, making no budget shows, but, being able to actually see your artistic vision on stage? And how has it kind of changed over the course of your career?
It definitely began with the no budget shows. And what I was talking about at uni, but then when I graduated from drama school, a very close collaborator of mine, Benedict Hardy, and I, we made a show called Yuri Wells, and for Melbourne Fringe, and it was a one-man show. And then we won this tiny award that meant that the show could go to Adelaide, and he would perform it in a shipping container in the Garden of Unearthly Delights in the 38-degree heat. He was doing a one-man show in a metal box. Like, that was sort of where it all began for us. And I know some people who were kind of running companies and things, saw that show or heard about that show. So that's really important, I think. And not just because people could see the work, which is the biggest thing, right? You need not just to be able to tell people your ideas, they need to be able to see the work that you make. And that's harder and harder, I think, in this climate, to find space and to have money, because even if the show has no budget, you have to have the time to make the show and still be able to earn money to live. So really tricky, but also it let me play as an artist. It let me sort of test some things out, and I think that was invaluable. Then I guess the next thing, I made some more plays with Hayloft Project, and I started to apply for, I guess, sort of emerging positions within companies, or sort of hassle artistic directors or directors in companies. And side note to this is I get messages from people asking me for opportunities, and I would say that 98% of them are young men. So if anyone else is listening, write to people and ask them for opportunities. It really helps. It's important to do, as hard as it is to do. So there's that. And I think I did that because I saw a lot of the young guys I was hanging around with do it. And so I decided I would do it too. And I also, this thing happened in the world where, in Australian theatre, where people realised suddenly that only men were directing plays. There's that sort of famous moment at Belvoir when all the male directors stood on stage and there was one woman. And I am the sort of beneficiary of that time, I think, as well, very much so, where people realised that women could also be directors and should be given opportunities. And I was able to sort of take up those opportunities. And I think, then I sort of was, I guess, inside companies a little bit and pitching ideas to artistic directors. And, that's really hit and miss. It's hard as a director to get up the show you are dreaming of, because artistic directors have the shows they're dreaming of, and that's their main priority most of the time. And then they have a whole lot of shows that they need their company to make, they believe, to make money or to sell more tickets or whatever the reason is. And so often they're the other projects that are sort of available to freelance directors. I think they're the main ways that I have sort of moved through that process.
Yeah, great. That was kind of my next question as well, about building ongoing relationships with companies, but I think it's probably exactly what you just said.
It's really helpful to figure out what's going on inside, because it sort of is and isn't what you think.
Mm-hmm.
It can often, they're just sort of funny institutions that are trying very hard to make things work. But it can be really daunting, I think, to crack into them. And you have to keep trying, is the truth. You have to hassle them a bit, because often I think people running companies are just trying very hard to kind of do too many jobs on a small budget. But also I would say, if you're running a company and you can sort of hold me to this, you've got to go out and see the work.
Yeah, very much. So we just talked about, those long-term relationships you've built with companies, but you're also a director who's built a lot of relationships with creatives who you kind of work with over and over again in different settings, in different cities. What does that collaborative partnership give you and also the people you work with?
It's so important. I used to wonder why people were always working with the same people when I was first starting out. And it's those collaborations are so important to my work. The opportunity to continue to explore something and to go sort of deeper with another artist is sort of everything, I think, when you're making work. And also when you're making work very quickly, which we often are, you really want that shorthand with someone. You want to be able to start sort of immediately. And so I'm so lucky to be able to call on the people who I kind of know well and have that history with, to sort of jump into that process. you also get to know people's sort of strengths and what you need as an artist inside a process. You know, if you need a particular brain or a particular aesthetic, you know, you sort of start to know who to call on to provoke those things in you. I would say the main thing for me with my collaborators is that I want dramaturgical brains in all of my creative team. I figured out quite quickly that if I had a creative, so a sound designer or a lighting designer or a scenic designer, costume, who was only interested in their particular aspect of the show, that I was generally quite unsatisfied by their work and that conversation. I want everyone on my process to be talking about the show as a whole, because I think the work is kind of clearer and tighter and more interesting if that's happening. And so I try to be really receptive to the insights of, you know, my lighting designer to the whole show. You know, I'm not just having a conversation with them about lighting. And I think also I trust them implicitly because they're experts at what they do. So I'm trying to communicate what I'm looking for and trusting that they're going to bring their own instincts to realise that. And then, of course, sometimes I say, I don't like that, or doesn't feel right. But I know that they know better than I do how to sort of paint with their brush, if that makes sense.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I think there's something, you know, we spoke earlier about how directing is a relationship process. And so being able to build those relationships over years and various collaborations, I think is really exciting. Yeah. Yesterday I spoke to some technical theatre and stage management students at NIDA about working as a director and working with stage management. So I want to ask you about the role that stage managers and the stage management team plays when you're in the theatre, you know, during rehearsals, during the run of the show.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked me about this because we never talk about this. And it's always kind of behind the scenes, unseen, often unacknowledged. It's so central. That relationship is like the key relationship for the show. And when you step away from a show as a director, that person is in charge of the work, is realising your work for you and caring for the work for you. So I really value my relationship with stage managers, and like creatives, really look forward to kind of when I have the opportunity to work with stage managers again and again, because I think you get a groove on in a similar way. You know, you understand each other and sort of how you can best work together. The best stage managers are extraordinary. Like, they feel a room, they feel the energy in the room, they are kind of protecting their actors, they know what their actors are going to need, they're anticipating what you need, what the creatives will need, they're feeling the energy of a show, quite literally, as they're calling it. It's just, yeah, it's everything. I just have enormous respect for them.
Yeah, there's something, I mean, even in the last few years, as we've talked about, you know, emotional safety for actors and everyone who works in the theatre, it's such a key role.
Yeah. And they see everything, you know, like they know exactly what's going on in a room, in a rehearsal room. It's, yeah, but they're crucial, very important.
We had a question come in, and it is, who are the film or TV directors or artistic directors that inspire you? I actually haven't spoken to you about film or screen at all. Is that something that you're interested in?
It is, but it's something that I never, ever get around to doing, even when I mean to, because other things always take over. And I think it's true now, actually. I've been working on a couple of film scripts, and now I'm about to go down to Melbourne and take on this job at the MTC, and that's going to make working on those projects very difficult. So Who are they? Do you know, the questions like this make me really nervous. I suddenly, like, my brain freezes and I think, who are they? I can't think of any.
Like, I've never seen a film in my life.
I know. I like best of lists terrify me. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to name anyone that will satisfy right now. Do you know, there's this one film though that I truly adore called Jeanne Dillman Brussels, about a woman who's basically using her body to kind of earn money, and also caring for a child, and is a housewife, and it's like 3 days of her life. And I saw it at the Sydney Film Festival years ago, and I think it's like 5 hours long, and it literally is like her making a meatloaf and stuff. And I love that. I suppose I love a real like real naturalism on film. I'm really attracted to, you know, things that aren't sort of as shiny, that feel very sort of true to life. But yeah, I can't give you more than that right now. And as soon as we hang up, I'll be like, oh, this and this and this and this. I got nothing right now, nothing.
No, I mean, that sounds great because, you know, you get to talk about, I guess, the aesthetics or like the things that we find interesting in the subject matter, which I think, you know, is sometimes what we're trying to get at when we talk about particular people who we admire or whose work we respond to. I also want to ask you about, I guess, over the course of your career and having worked in different places, what are the kinds of changes that you've seen in the theatre? Like in terms of, I guess it's quite a broad question, but I was thinking of things like work culture or aesthetics, artistic preoccupations, contribution to cultural conversations. Like I think, you know, things have changed a lot societally over the last little while. And so I guess how have you seen that translate into the theatre?
I think, you know, one of the big things would be the sort of the fact that there is a decentering of whiteness occurring, I think, but it is very slow. I think it's fair to say, but there's like an inching towards an awareness of that, and that is the main thing for me that's on my mind right now, and we are further behind on that than certainly what I'm seeing over in the UK, where I was living before now. Actually, you know, Vicky Featherstone at the Royal Court, he would be one of the people I would say I most admire in terms of the work she's doing at that company, and not selling it in that way. You know, she's not telling people about the massive changes that she's making. She's doing them. She's programming it differently. That extraordinary play that was on at Darlinghurst recently.
Seven Methods?
Seven Methods was at the Royal Court initially. Yeah. And had a massive season there, and has recently just come back to their main stage. So it began on their smaller stage and moved up to their main stage. And that for me is that's the model, and that's really exciting. You know, so I think check her out. It's openly political, but it's really still about the art and the quality of the work. So there's that. Yeah, what else? I guess there is a real push now for what you were talking about with stage managers, a sort of a safety in a room and a care. And I think I don't actually, because I'm a director and I haven't acted for quite some time, I didn't really know what other people's rooms were like. You know, you don't really know what's going on in those other spaces. But it's a relief to know now that there is a sort of agreed upon baseline for care and support. And I think companies have, you know, out of necessity stepped up to that, but actually can see the benefits of that too. And I think it allows actors and writers, people in a process, to be a bit more honest and vulnerable. Like, the work benefits is the truth when you make changes like that. I guess they're the main changes that I'm noticing. I'm trying to think what else. There was a real, I feel like there's a hunger for Australian work, but I hope that that's true. It's certainly how it feels to me. Less of a sort of, auteur stamp on a classic, maybe. Bit of a shift to films and books being adapted rather than the old classic plays.
Yeah, that's really true, actually, just thinking about some of the shows that are happening around the country at the moment in places where they can have theatre.
Oh, yeah.
I just got a message from the audience that said, "Thank you for your beautiful words about stage managers."
Oh, love them. Pleasure.
I wanted to talk to you about the position that you are about to take up at MTC,
Yes.
starting full-time in January. What are you excited for in that role?
What I'm most excited for is to be part of a community and to help facilitate the sort of work that community wants to make, and to bring people in to see that work, to hear those other stories and other voices. That's what feels most exciting to me, and what I can offer as artistic director in that role. It really, there's a whole kind of new energy that is possible, I think, and I really want to be part of the celebration of that. So that's, it's quite simple in that respect.
Well, I mean, you said community. So for you, would that be like the community around MTC, or like the Melbourne artistic community, or like that city and that state?
Yeah, I think when I sort of went for the role, I started to talk about kind of multiple communities, because there is that community around MTC that exists already, and then there's the sort of artistic community of Melbourne, and then around that there's just the broader kind of population. And actually an artistic director's job, in my opinion, is to serve all three of those communities, and to have all three of those communities in your mind at all times, and to bring them together. So that's how I think about it. Theatre is at the moment a sort of very white middle class art form, and I think that is to sort of our it's we're missing out is the best way to say it. And yeah, I really want to be able to open it up.
That's I think that's a very exciting thing. I think for a lot of people who will be joining us for this conversation, students and early career artists, and so to hear that that major companies do think about opening up, about being accessible to people as institutions, as I guess places that lead a cultural conversation, I think is really heartening.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, also, we are a state company. That's what the role of that institution is for Victoria. So, I'm really excited to be able to do that. Do you see me? I'm trying to avoid the sun. Have you noticed that?
I'm really enjoying it. Every so often, half of your face is just gilded.
I'm so sorry. And I get all carried away, and then I look at this tiny version I have of myself I'm trying not to look at, and then I see that it's just all light reflecting. I apologize.
That's quite all right. I think that was kind of all of my questions. I think it's really useful to be able to talk about things like directing, about leadership, with someone who has worked in different contexts with different companies. And, also you talk about what it is to be a woman in this industry and the kind of stories that we get to tell or that people respond to. So Yeah, thank you so much for joining us this
Thank
afternoon.
you for asking me.
Oh, such a pleasure. It's
Tell me before I go, what do you think are the, you asked me about the sort of changes or the culture that you notice now. What do you think?
I think it's become safer for people, for artists, which is really heartening. I mean, I think, the conversations we're having around intimacy directors and around, putting in steps to keep people safe and reporting lines, like all of that OH&S stuff, which sounds so boring. And I think for some people, who are maybe a bit more traditional minded, it's like an instinctive, but that curbs creativity kind of response, which I think is maybe even a bit generational, because most of the people I talk to who are kind of at the same point of their career as me, we are all on the same page. So it's really exciting that this is becoming standard. And I think the kinds of stories that are being told are kind of opening up a little bit as well. I think sometimes, Australia, it feels like we're a kind of outpost or a little bit isolated. And I think there is a love for work that's like Australian work, but the fact that Australian work isn't just the story that we've told about ourselves for so long. We're not just this country of bush and beaches. That there are a lot of different people who live here and have things to share, which I think is exciting. And also the way, something like Seven Methods, the fact that we can connect with stories like that in this globalized world and find the relevances for us as Australians, I think is really exciting as well.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you.
It's heartening, which is always good.
Yeah.
And I think it's an exciting time to be working in theatre, in spite of all of the, I guess,
I know.
very real challenges.
Yeah.
Culturally, it feels like a good moment.
But hurry up, right? Yes, but hurry up.
Yes, always that. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.